You are listening to the CAD podcast. This is the place where computer-aided design and drafting meets humor and practicality, with a touch of business acumen thrown in for fun. Jim and Rocco, the owners of Zentech Consultants, the premier U.S. technology consulting firm for architecture, engineering, construction, and manufacturing, discuss the fascinating world of CAD with some humor and some honesty. The CAD podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the CAD podcast with Jim and Rocco from Zentech Consultants. I am your eloquent and charming host, Jim, and with me, as always, is my partner.
Hello, it's Rocco Parisi.
Hey, look at you getting all bubbly and effusive today. It's nice. You like talking to a rock with you in the intros. Good. See, you've been practicing. But that's all right. I don't have to worry about how you speak today because we have a guest in studio today. We have Owen Wengerd here with us today. Owen, thanks for being here.
Hi. I'm glad to be on the show with you guys. It's an interesting introduction.
They're always interesting. We try to keep it fun. So, and any chance I get to torture Rocco, that's always a plus. I'm not going to let that go. So, all right. So, Owen, just for you guys who don't know him, Owen is a CAD industry veteran, and he's been active in CAD and user groups and online discussion groups since the early 90s. He's the president of Manusoft, which I'm sure most of you guys have heard of. It's a consultancy and software development business based in Tampa, Florida. But these days, right, Owen spends most of his time working as a senior software engineer for BricsCAD, or Brixis, right, the makers of BricsCAD. So we invited Owen here to talk to us today because we're going to get into the topic for today, which is monopolistic CAD practices and their impact on the design build world. So very controversial stuff. We're going to get everybody upset today if we possibly can. So we invited Owen, right, because he's got some distinct ideas on consumer advocacy for those of us in the CAD and the design build areas. And in particular, I want to talk to him about the impact that monopolistic practices can have on the design world as a whole, and the long-term effects that such an environment can have on both individuals and on companies. Right? But first, because I've been talking too much as I normally do, let's get a little info on Owen and why he thinks this is such an important topic. So, Owen, why don't you tell our listeners about yourself and your background, and particularly as it pertains to your views on today's topic.
Well, thanks for having me on. I think it's an interesting topic, and curious to see how we move along on this, and if we go on any tangents. So.
Tangents are what we do best
with. Yeah. I'm a software developer, but I did start out as an end user. And, I never did like bullies. Even in school, I stood up to the bigger schoolyard bullies. And I've had a number of run-ins with corporate bullies over the years, in particular with Autodesk.
Who we're definitely beating up on today.
Well, we're definitely going to beat up on Autodesk. They're an easy target, and I think well-deserved target. So, for instance, their license agreement, been a few years since I did it. I guess 3 or 4, maybe 5 years. I don't even know. But I used to every year with the new AutoCAD release review their license agreement changes. Mm-hmm. And I'd post an article on Ralph Grabowski's Upfront e-zine highlighting any changes. And one of the things I used to look at is number of words, and I remember, guess what happened every year? More words, more words,
more legalese, more potential
always went up.
Yep.
I don't remember the exact date. I'm guessing it was around 2005, 2004. Autodesk had filed a lawsuit against the Open Design Alliance, which was a young organization at that time, reverse engineering the DWG format, providing libraries. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I had created a website just about this lawsuit where I published legal filings and expert commentary with the goal to keep Autodesk's legal maneuverings in the limelight. And I wanted to make sure that they paid a price for their bullying tactics. It was pretty much what everybody agreed it was.
They're good at those. Everybody agrees they are. So that actually,
Well,
yeah. I'm not trying to mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
go right ahead.
No. I was going to say that actually brings right into what, to my mind, right, is the big issue, right? That's really been hitting the headlines in recent months, right? And that's the infamous, Autodesk Revit letter, which I'm sure most of our listeners have heard. I know Rocco and I have talked about it before. And it's where a number of the world's leading architecture firms, they posted an open letter accusing Autodesk of forcing them into annual subscription contracts and then failing to provide any type of reasonable advances or upgrades or processes to the software for years, right? That they've, it says that they've just been putting in, minor user interface changes and, some software fixes that should have been part of like regular patches. And to my mind, right, this is the core problem of the entire SaaS, right? The software as a service model of software licensing. And it's an issue that, like I said, we've talked about on the podcast before. And to my very simple mind, it seems like it's a process that is just ripe for abuse and that it doesn't benefit anyone but the software developers. Right, so let's start there, Owen. What are your views on software as a service in general, and in particular the way that Autodesk administers that licensing concept for their clients?
Well, yeah, that Revit letter and its aftermath have been quite fascinating. But let me just lay out my general views on software as a service. First of all, I personally think it's fair to view all software as a service. I mean, you have the obvious examples of things like tax software that has to be updated every time the tax law changes. But as a programmer, I know very well that any software I write is never finished. Software always has bugs that need to be fixed, can always be optimized a bit more, it can always have more features added, it needs to be adapted to run on new platforms and so on. It's never a finished product. And I think, at least in that sense, well, okay, software is a service, and I think it's perfectly valid to think of it as a service. So the real problem, I think, is the licensing, the restrictive licensing, and especially the way Autodesk is doing it, springing new changes one after the other. And, these are serious changes that companies have to adapt their budgeting to. Because of changes in costs, they've got to acquire new licenses. The kinds of things that you normally take time to adapt to and become acclimated to, and Autodesk is just, each year change. What you planned for last year becomes irrelevant the following year. And so to my mind, it is about the licensing. And look, when a company like Autodesk has their end users so far over the barrel that they can just make these draconian changes at will, it's extortion, plain and simple.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. I mean, your point's a real valid one, right? I think that, at its core, I agree with you. I don't think that the idea of like, software as a service and recurring annual subscription is inherently bad, right? It's a matter of how it's being employed. Right. By the company, right? I mean, there are people out there, right, particularly, large firms who actually see benefit from those, quote unquote, fixed budgeted annual costs. And I think that the problem really lies in the lack of choice that too many developers have implemented, right? Like you said, they're over the barrel and users have to accept their annual subscription policies, no matter how horrible they may be, how much time or training they're going to have to implement because of it, or you lose the use of your design software. Like you said, it's almost like a form of legalized blackmail. And to my mind, the simple act of providing a choice, right, eliminates this entire issue. I really think if you let the users who want to get a perpetual license with a maintenance subscription have that, and then the people who want an annual budget amount, right, annual subscription, let them have it. Right, and then you're not skirting those monopolistic and ethically questionable practices, right? Which kind of leads me to my next question for you, Owen. You work at Brixis, right? And their CAD products allow users to actually choose, right? They can have either the annual license or the perpetual license, right? So
right.
what do you think? I mean, you work there, right? Is that ethically driven, or is it a business based decision, right? Does Brixis see that as a way to crack Autodesk's monopoly, right, for a business standpoint, or do they feel it's the right thing to do? I'm no pressure to talk about your bosses.
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's a business decision. I mean, let's be honest, a company like Brixis that's trying to compete with Autodesk and other large, well-established companies, they can't survive unless they give customers what they want. And, well, as well as I do, customers want perpetual licenses. It's not a question. Yeah, there are some customers who can benefit from the subscription model, and they should be able to, no doubt. But I don't believe for a minute, though, that Brixis would behave like Autodesk does now if the roles were suddenly reversed, simply because I know Brixis leadership views the company's relationships with customers as an asset instead of a value proposition. So, yeah, while the company, of course, like all companies, they've got to make their decisions based on what's best for the business. It's a long-term outlook. The goal with companies like Brixis, not only Brixis, but I know other companies that have been in business for a long time, who value relationships with customers. And if you take the long view that way, it changes the decision making. So it is a business decision, but it's an ethical one. And it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think your point is great. We're actually going to get into that a little bit later, I think, in our second segment. I want to talk about that because that mindset of whether or not you're looking for the short-term fast profit or the long-term relationship for a stable business, that's a distinct mindset that I think a lot of companies have gotten away from. I want to get into that more. We'll talk about that later. But for right now, I want to wake up Rocco, who I'm sure I put to sleep with my rambling. So Rocco, wake up and answer a question for me. In terms of our clients,
You never ramble, Jim.
no, I never ramble. Well, maybe a little. My wife will tell you otherwise. She's convinced that's all I do. So, in terms of our clients, right? What is or what seems to be the prevailing opinion on the forced annual subscription model, right? Do we see people actively looking for a better licensing model, or do you think that most people are okay with the Autodesk platform the way it is?
It depends on who you're talking to within the organization, right? If it's the one paying a bill, it's a different story from the one using the tool. But in general, there certainly is a lot of frustration with Autodesk and everything that's been going on. And it's funny, if you read that letter, everything is, and you understand the industry enough, everything is right on point of what was covered there. So it all comes down to who you're talking to. But in general, customers, prefer more options, and they certainly feel like they're stuck. Autodesk puts out great products, and it's the industry standard for the most part, right? But they do feel like they're stuck.
All right. So the Autodesk model then. And let me be fair, right? It's not only Autodesk who does this, right? This is most large software developers, right? Microsoft does it, Adobe does it. All of the big companies are doing the same thing. We're beating up on Autodesk because this is a CAD-based podcast, and they're the ones that we deal with every day, right? They're the big elephant in the room. So the Autodesk model has an impact on, I think, the number of licenses that companies need to buy as well, right? Right now, Autodesk is actively trying to eliminate, network, multi-user, and shared licensing entirely. Though honestly, they've gotten such heated feedback in the current environment that they postponed that policy change twice now. And a lot of us who are in the design world, we're dependent on multi-seat licenses, right? Particularly when we have to work remotely. So, Owen, what are your thoughts on pooled network licensing and Autodesk's approach to trying to eliminate those? They claim that it's for the user's benefit, right? I swear I've read their rationale like 5 times and I just don't understand it. But do you think that's true, or is it just to the benefit of Autodesk's bottom line?
Well, of course, that's not true. I mean, do you know any users who benefit? No.
I haven't been able to find one or even understand the explanation they give. No.
Right. Well, you touched on it. Frankly, I don't think it's going to help Autodesk's bottom line. I really think that a lot of the strategy here is Autodesk probing to see what they can get away with. It's really gathering some marketing information, some feedback, and they're going to take that feedback and make adjustments. And I think they'll just as quickly back off. As you mentioned, they've already delayed this several times. I mean, they can completely reverse this policy if they see that they're not getting the results they want. So we'll just have to wait and see. But clearly, it's not benefiting users.
Yeah, well, like I said, it goes back to like you said earlier, right? It's the bully syndrome. How far can I push? How far can I push before somebody swings back? And then I back away. You know, and it's that's a terrible approach from both a human standpoint and a business standpoint for me.
It's just not it's not a good policy. But you know, Autodesk, they've for many years that's been their kind of approach to it. And well, if that's your goal, to maximize that bottom line in the short term, and I guess they're fairly successful at it.
So, all right. So I'd say at this point, let's take a quick break to hear from today's sponsor. And then when we come back, we'll get into what Owen sees as the biggest impact of these licensing practices, not just in terms of pricing, but in how they affect hiring and work practices for the entire industry. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just 1 minute with more of the Cattle Call Podcast. Today's Cattle Call Podcast is being brought to you by CAD, the latest and greatest CAD software out there on the market today. It's growing by leaps and bounds, and the beauty of it is that CAD allows you to use all of your current drawing files, all of the CAD commands and macros and features and Lisp routines and customizations and configurations that you've already developed, right? Without any transition. Your people can be up and running in CAD in a matter of hours, right? So to help you make that transition here at Zentex, one of the things that we've done is we have actually created a Make the Move to CAD program to help you move from your Autodesk-based platform over into CAD with minimal time and risk and investment. And Rocco is going to tell you all about it. Rocco?
I'm going to tell you all about it. Well, there's a great deal of information that's available right on our website. It's zentechconsultants.net. You can reach out to us at sales@zentechconsultants.net or give us a call, 866-824-4459. But yeah, that's the core idea behind it, Jim. If you're an AutoCAD user and you're looking to make the move to CAD, we're here to help make an easier transition for you. So check us out. Let us know how we can help you.
Perfect answer. CAD, the smartest CAD system on the market today. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Cattle Call Podcast. All right, so today we are talking with our special guest, Owen Wengerd of Brixis, and about the dangers of predatory software licensing practices by major software developers. And in the first segment, we talk mostly about cost, right? And now I'd like to get into more of the human impact of these practices, right? It's really easy sometimes to just shrug things like this off under the guise of, well, you know, it's just business, right? You know, but there really is an impact, I think, to people's lives and companies' functionality from forced subscriptions. So, Owen, in terms of business growth and hiring, what do you think is the impact on the design industry? I mean, you know, the developers market the annual subscription model as being, you know, beneficial to companies because they can up or downscale the license numbers to meet their workloads on the fly. Have you found that to actually be the case?
I definitely have not. I will admit that as a small developer, I probably don't have the exposure to large companies that may have different experience, but in my experience, it's mostly a false narrative as far as I can tell. I mean, first of all, as long as software companies are selling these subscriptions by the year, annual subscriptions, instead of by the minute or by the hour, for example, I don't see how a company can quickly adjust licenses. They're already committed in many cases for annual subscriptions. So short-term fluctuations would be impossible to make quick adjustments anyway in these long subscriptions. And I don't know, there might possibly be some companies on shape. I don't know exactly how their cost structure works, but that deal with shorter by the minute, by the hour type licensing. But by and large, I think the companies are using the longer term subscription licenses. They often sell shorter term subscriptions, but the pricing structure of those shorter terms are impractical, essentially forcing customers to use the longer term. And, you know, the longer term subscription, it locks them in anyway. So
they push them to the 1 or the 3 year. And I know that Autodesk originally did start off offering the monthlies, and I don't even know. I haven't seen it in so long. I don't even know if they do offer those anymore. Rocco, do you know? Do they still offer those?
I believe they do for some products. They were doing quarterlies for a while as well.
I know they had quarterlies, but
yeah,
even the quarterlies, they were ramping up the cost. Like I think when they first introduced it, it was fairly cost competitive to go with a quarterly, but then they started ramping up the costs, basically squeezing customers onto the longer term subscriptions.
And that has a big impact. So, all right. So, you know, when I think about, you know, the way that licensing processes and fees have such a big impact, right, on our client company's profitability, right? And I have to wonder, how does that licensing model affect hiring processes? All right, and I think that's because there's a big concern about holding recurring subscriptions that, you know, like Owen was just saying, right, that they're not as likely to hire because, you know, they have to hold those licenses for at least a year, right? So, or if they do, then they prefer to work with contractors or part-time employees because, you know, the subscription model, you know, they can add the one seat for a short one-term, you know, 1 year job if possible. Though, as Owen pointed out, right, it's never that easy in practice to add or remove those seats as the developers always want you to think. There are always, you know, fine print in all of those contracts. So, you know, but I think, though, that means that people don't get, you know, from a hiring standpoint, they don't get the benefits, the holidays, the time off, the sick leave. And really what I'm afraid is winding up happening, and I'm starting to see this more and more, is that your designers and your drafters, they become almost a commodity, right? We become kind of like red Solo cups, right? We buy them when we need them, and then we throw them out once they serve their purpose. Right? And I don't know that that's a good thing for us as a nation or as an industry. So Owen, from a human standpoint, right? Do you see this being a negative for individuals in the industry as a whole, or am I just being my usual paranoid self?
Well, I don't know. I guess I would defer a little bit and kind of take a wait and see attitude. It clearly is having an impact, but how will that impact shake out? Will it be a net positive, net negative? I don't know. I'm going to say wait and see, but I would like to just tell you a little bit of a story. This is a little bit different perspective. This is from the perspective of a software developer, an independent software developer. You know, many years ago, I was a member of Autodesk Developer Network. And one of the benefits of membership in this developer network was I had access to pre-release versions of AutoCAD and NFR, not for resale licenses, that I could use for my development work. Meaning I didn't have to shell out, at that time, almost $3,000 each year for an AutoCAD license in order to develop my software, which was huge. But I had a run-in with Autodesk and got booted off the developer network and ended up having to start buying the AutoCAD license, a commercial license, every year in order to continue developing my software. Now, the moral of the story there is, how did that affect my hiring practices? Well, it added, of course, more costs. It made it basically impossible for me to hire anybody to help me with my development work because the restrictions on the license meant if I hire one person and now two of us are using that same AutoCAD, even if it was just, let's say, for technical support for my software, I would have to buy two commercial licenses of AutoCAD, $6,000, not practical. So it's just a point, making the point there that the license cost and license terms definitely impact a small company. Now, I don't know, maybe things would be different now for that scenario if I had access to small short-term subscriptions, and maybe that would have been a benefit for me. I'm not sure. And it just kind of raises the point that, I don't know, I think things will shake out eventually. We're going through a period now when we've got a large company trying to get their way, but at some point I think there will be some pushback. I think we'll reach some equilibrium, maybe even find some ways that we do see actual benefits to end users and to employees of these larger companies. I just think we have to wait and see.
Okay, that's a fair assessment. I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic on this, though. So I'm gonna bring up my inner conspiracist for a minute, right? And I'm gonna posit that these types of licensing practices benefit obviously nobody but the software developer, right? And it hurts, I think, not just individual workers and the companies that they work for, but really taking it further, the nation and the world as a whole, right? So again, here's my conspiracy theory, right? So the problem that we have here, I think, is that you're dealing with short-term, profit-seeking C-level shareholders, right? Those C-suite people, not purple. Those people in a firm, right? Are the ones who see the real benefit, right? These practices don't even help the general shareholder, right? Because what you wind up doing is diluting the product and alienating your client base. Right, so it goes back to what we were talking about in the first segment, right? So long-term investors actually wind up losing money and share value, right? While those C-level staff, right, their compensation is tied to share price, right? Their pay, their benefits, their bonuses, all tied to share price, and the instant increase of share value at any cost is the only driving force that they have, right? And I think that's what leads to the devaluation and collapse of long-standing institutional firms, like we saw it with Sears and we saw it with Toys R Us, right? That were once cornerstones of our economy, right? And I see software developers going that same way, right? What was once upon a time a bunch of designers and engineers who had a great idea and hired some coders like yourself, and we were all working towards a common goal to get great products for each other. I think control has been ceded over to professional board members who have zero interest in their clients or in improving their product. And I think that spells long-term disaster, right, to the company, to my mind. So, Owen, what are your thoughts? I mean, do you think that those business practices have a negative effect on the economy and the nation, right? Or am I just, again, being crazy and paranoid?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Jim.
Would you hear that, Rocco? Someone thinks I'm right.
You may be crazy as well.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Sure. One doesn't preclude the other. Fair point.
Who isn't crazy these days with all this COVID-19 pandemic going on? And, that the pandemic has already had a dramatic effect on the economy, and it's not done yet. I think you raised some excellent points about the adverse incentives that cause these kinds of, what I would say irrational decisions. I mean, they're at least irrational from our perspective. Obviously, they have good reasons, but as I said, there are these adverse incentives that are driving these kinds of things, and you spelled it out well. So, I've seen the effects of this pandemic has been people working from home, and it's changed things. A lot of predictions about, it's going to have permanent impacts. But I also think it's important to keep things in perspective. And just like with the pandemic, with the changes in licensing practices going on in the industry, I do think it's important to keep things in perspective. We're in the middle of this right now. Everything's exaggerated, feels more impactful than it really is. And I would venture to guess that in 20 years, by the year 2040, 2020 will be a mostly forgotten blip on our timeline. And, well, we can hope at least that predatory licensing practices will have come and gone. Maybe we'll have something even worse. I don't know, but it could be better.
Rocco, let me ask you then. In terms of our client base, right? What have you seen any big change with this licensing structure in their hiring practices? Have we seen more growth in like temp employees and short-term license purchases, or do we find that most people are still looking to hire full-time workers with long-term licensing seat purchases? What do you see?
Yeah, it's still long term. To work with folks short term, there's so much up. How do I describe it? There's so much time that's involved in ramping people up, from getting them accustomed to the employees, the culture of a company, to the licensing and the way that they work, and who's going to work out, who's not going to work out. So I still think that long-term people look for loyal, dedicated employees, and that's what they want in the licensing model that they buy. I think that it's important to be able to have a long-term, affordable solution to their business needs, not short-term, expensive options.
And companies want stability. They want to know what it's going to cost in 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years. And I think it's worth interjecting here that, remember, I don't know, might have been in the late 90s already. I don't remember if it was that early, but there was a period of time when, before the .com or maybe during the .com bubble, when companies were farming out, hiring contract workers in Asia and India. And, we went kind of through a phase of that. But now we've started to revert back in the last 10 years, I think, where companies are, again, recognizing it's important to have relationships, one-on-one personal relationships with their employees, and have training and work together in teams where you have personal contact with each other. That these are important things to have, and I think that's an example of how these things tend to, the pendulum swings back. It tends to reach some equilibrium again, and I just think right now the pendulum is swinging out, but it's going to revert back a little bit, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's the benefit of a free market, right? It's the true cause. It's the great self-leveler. It fixes itself, right?
Well, we certainly like to think so, and we hope so.
We hope so. All right. So with that in mind, then, Owen, before we leave it here today, I want to give you one last chance here to get into any aspect of this topic that I haven't considered. Anything. What do you think our listeners need to know about the monopolistic CAD software practices that I overlooked? Unleash your inner libertarian and give us some food for thought.
Great. Well, I touched on it briefly, but one of the things I think that often gets overlooked is that CAD consumers, end users, actually do have some power to fight back. The Revit letter is a small example. It shows how the power can be amplified and used. In this case, the Revit letter, it generated some bad publicity, and bad publicity is a real damage to a company like Autodesk. But I think it's, at least in the case of the letter here, it's not sustained. It's a one-time thing. Autodesk rolls out the PR people, and that's fine. But if consumers can find a way to sustain that kind of pressure on a company, I think they can really push back effectively. And that's what you have to do, I think, to a bully. So, for example, I would like to see, and I think the key to real change in this especially with the licensing and the legal, but also in other aspects of the relationship with the software providers, is to marshal the power of users. I mean, look at a company like Autodesk. They have, well, it depends who you ask, but potentially millions of users, probably at least hundreds of thousands. And you know, if those users could make a sustained and credible threat to Autodesk's bottom line, Autodesk will respond. So I've years ago, I advocated, was active for a while in the Autodesk user group, Augie. And
though they're not related to Autodesk any longer.
Well, it's at one time was, I think 90% of their costs were paid by Autodesk. So Autodesk controlled the group, and now over time Autodesk has voluntarily withdrawn support. So now they're branching out, I think. But years ago, I had advocated to Augie to try to establish some kind of, at the time I remember referring to it like a union of users, and try to marshal forces and go to Autodesk and say, look, we demand to negotiate some changes in your license agreement, and as a collective bargaining unit.
Like that idea a lot, right? Workers of the world unite, right? I love it.
Well, I mean, of course, at the time, people said, well, yeah, it sounds interesting, but, you know, doing something like that requires a real leadership position in a large group, and to have the power to actually get something done. And I suppose it could happen. Maybe it will in the near future. But one of the things I realized at the time was that in order for that to be effective, there has to be first a viable alternative. And, you know, Autodesk knows this as well. They've been through, for instance, with Revit, by organizing government units to require Revit format drawing files, they effectively get some control over the file format, and they've controlled that file format. Things might change now that ODA is reverse engineering the Revit file format, but with those kinds of practices, as long as Autodesk has a monopoly and users are captive, I mean, it's empty threats to go and say, look, change your license agreement or else, because there is nothing else.
Right. And that's where I think, you know, systems like, and that's why, you know, we work with BricsCAD, and obviously you're with Bricsys, because I think we need viable alternatives. I think you pinpointed the ultimate problem. Until you can start to break the monopoly and effectively bring in, you know, better products at a fair price with, you know, reasonable business approaches. Right, you just kind of have to stay there, right? And I know it's a little scary for folks, but you know, I'm not trying to do a sales pitch here today, but, you know, think about and look at other products and consider making that move to kind of get yourself out from under. Because until a bunch of us get out from under the thumb of those oppressive software developers, nobody's getting out, right? Somebody's got to squeak out first. Somebody's got to take the risk and lead the way. So,
well, let me interject you there, Jim, and let's just think about what happens when you boil a pot of water and then throw a frog into it. You know where I'm going with this. You throw a frog into the boiling pot of water, it jumps out. But if you put the frog into the cold water and then boil it, you'll boil it right to death. And, you know, AutoCAD users are being boiled to death right now.
Yeah, because Autodesk is smart enough to give it the slow heat and not the sudden slap.
That's right. Yeah. And so I really think, and this would be my libertarian dream, is that if we could create a viable alternative platform, and I think BricsCAD is that viable alternative platform right now. I think it already exists. If AutoCAD users can see that they have a viable platform, I think they can use that. Of course, they can change platforms, but it also can be used as a bargaining chip, and it gives them power. So that would be my dream, to see users use that power that they have, organize it, band together, and push back. And that would be the free market at work. Give both sides equal power, find something that works for both, and that would be the ideal, I think.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I agree with that 100%. I like that. Good answer. All right, so I think that covers our topic for today. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here, but I want to thank Owen for being here today, and I hope that, Owen, we didn't frighten you. You'll agree to come back again, right? Despite being exposed to my personal paranoia.
I am a little bit frightened, I have to admit, but I'll keep this in mind. I might be able to come over get over my fright here.
I appreciate that. Rocco never has. Rocco just constantly lives in fear, going, "Oh, how did I get tied up with this idiot?" Well, that's all right. So my wife says too. It's all good. All right. So with that, folks, I think we can get out of here. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next time on the Cattle Call Podcast. All right, everybody. Today's Cattle Call was brought to you courtesy of Zentech Consultants. That's Rocco and I. Zentech Consultants works with design and manufacturing firms to help our clients purchase and implement the software that they need in these complex industries. We provide a single point of contact for clients to buy, develop, and learn the most vital software systems for your specific needs. Zentech strives to be your trusted technology partner from your initial needs all the way through long-term support and training for your entire staff. So Rocco, why don't you tell them how to reach out to Zentech?
All right, yeah, you can reach out to us through zentechconsultants.net. You can email us at sales@zentechconsultants.net, or you can even call us 866-824-4459.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing from y'all.